You know, I wasn't planning on heading back to Ori this soon after doing my original review a few months back, but Moon Studios and Microsoft were kind enough to pass me along a review copy, so we're heading back in. During Microsoft's E3 2017 conference, one of the biggest highlights was, out of nowhere, the announcement of a sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori: Will of the Wisps. I was excited for sure as I really enjoyed the first one, and this one definitely looked like it had a lot more backing behind it. But one of the big things I was really excited for, they brought in one Dr. M on board, aka the one behind AM2R, another Metroid 2 remake, which honestly was one of my favorite games to come out that year, fan project or not. So, does this sequel rise above its predecessor? Only one way to find out, so let's get to it. Will of the Wisps takes place right where the first game left off, with Kuro's last egg hatching into a baby owl known as Ku, who is raised along with Ori, Naru, and Gumo as part of their family. However, Ku is born with a broken wing and can't fly on his own. That is until they fix up his wing and Ori and Ku go for a flight, but a storm ends up making them crash land into a new forest known as Naiman, and the two of them get separated. Ori eventually runs into Koula, I think I'm pronouncing that right, a giant toad who informs Ori that the forest is in danger, and in order for everything to be returned back to normal, he needs to hunt down and restore Wisp in order to get the forest back to its full strength. But an owl known as Shriek is trying to stop them at any cost, for reasons later explained. So Ori sets out to restore the forest back to its former glory, find Ku, and go back home. So if that sounds familiar, that's kind of because it is. This game follows a lot of the same story beats as the first one, but not in a bad way. The plot is simple, but little character moments here and there make up for it. The opening isn't nearly as soul-crushing, but it does a good job establishing bonds between characters, and when cutscenes come up, they're much more livelier than last time. And Shriek's backstory, I gotta say, is really effective once you know the whole deal, and is probably the most tragic part of the game. Though I do think at points it gets a little predictable. There's a big moment in the Silent Woods that I saw coming a mile away, and where it goes to by the end of the story, I kinda pieced that together really early on. Not bad, but I did find it a bit too predictable there. But overall, I think the plot works out pretty well, and it still keeps that show don't tell nature that the first game did so well. You know, I just sang the praises of how good the first game looked a few months back, but Ori 2, like, wow! Just goes to show all the advancements from the beginning of this generation to the end of this generation. Ori 2's visuals are just hypnotizing. The first game was mostly 2D, while this game incorporates a lot more 3D elements that blend in perfectly and really enhances areas. The models and sprites all look fantastic, but the environments are really the show stealer. Like, just look at these. These are fully realized places. The eeriness of the Silent Woods, the calmness of the lakeside, the denseness of the forest, it all is just beautiful, and the lighting is top notch. You can seriously take a screenshot anywhere in this game, and it becomes a wallpaper. And the soundtrack is even better than the first one, which is saying a lot. Almost every area has a distinct sound to it, and the game knows just when to ramp the music up in sequences. It's a much more cinematic feeling score that works perfectly with the game, and I may or may not have played it while working on projects. Just maybe. There's also quite a bit of voice acting this time around. Most of it is still their own fictional language, but it does add a lot more to the sense of life in the world, so it's a nice touch. Ori 2's presentation is just a step up in every way from a game that was already leading the pack in its genre. So if they did that much to the presentation, what about the gameplay? Will of the Wisp is still a metroidvania, where you explore new areas to find items, get new powers to use those to access new areas. That much stays the same throughout this game, but it's a bit more non-linear than last time. Once you start actively looking for the Wisp, you're free to pick any major area with a lot less direction than last time. So pick the order as you please, but right away I could tell they were listening to feedback, because a ton of changes have been made from the first game mechanically. First off, the game now autosaves and checkpoints regularly. Unlike the first game where you had to make your own save points, here, if you die, you're sent to a checkpoint and they're frequent. Pretty much any time you hit the ground, it's a checkpoint. Next, combat options have been drastically increased. Last time you had to fight from afar in a much more passive nature. Here, one of your first powers you get is a sword. I think that speaks volumes. And you gain several other skills that you're able to have 3 equipped at any time. These include healing spells, a bow and arrow, a fire orb that you can bounce off of like last time, though thankfully it's not nearly as overpowered, and much more. And with these new combat powers, proper boss encounters have been added to the game, as opposed to more chase and stealth sequences, but those do return as well. They also changed up the entire item system. Now you only get half of an energy cell or life orb as opposed to getting a full one, so now you need to find 2 of them in order to reap the benefits. And there's no more ability tree system. Rather, now the spirits act more like currency that you can use to buy new moves like mentioned before, or new passive abilities that you can equip yourself with. You can increase how many you have at a time by completing battle gauntlets. Time trials have been added and winning them nets you a ton of money. You can also buy maps to get an idea of the world ahead of you and plan out your route, and you can warp to any altar you've been to at any time to help with backtracking. And that's about the new in Ori Will of the Wisps. So what changes did they make for the better? If there's one thing I really have to commend Moon Studios for doing with this outing, it's that it's clear they listened to feedback from the first game and were not afraid to make changes. Like the checkpoint system, it's already a massive improvement. I get what they were going for originally, but the more you play the game, the more it kind of became a nuisance. Now I can keep going without dying and then trying to remember, oh wait, when was the last time I saved? Oh god, oh no. I also love the additions to the combat. Fights are now much more interesting as the enemy variety has been significantly increased too. And you have the options to actually try and make new loadouts. I primarily stuck to these sentries that would hit anything near them, and then melee combat them. And when I got this hammer, just everything went down no problem. It also helps that the boss fights are actually pretty good. They have a good mixture of fighting them head on and movement, which keeps them interesting. They also incorporate those escape sequences into the boss fights, which is pretty clever honestly. And like, I know I gushed about it before, but just like, look how gorgeous this game is. And it never looks low res or off in any point of the game, it just all blends together magically. The sense of atmosphere is totally here too. I do think there are a lot more calmer areas here, and there's a lot more variety to keep each area very identifiable. And don't worry, this game is not afraid to get dark and ominous as seen by Shriek. Oh my gosh, I love this character design. Shriek appeals to me so much because she has the same fright factor of Kuro, but she also moves very differently than a normal owl, so it throws you off just enough. And her backstory and the ending just brought it all home to me. Exploring the world is also much nicer too, as you can buy those maps to help route new areas, and like my favorite new addition, you can warp to any save point at any time. Oh my gosh, this saves such an insane amount of time, you have no idea. Thank you for that. I also love throughout the game there's a lot more creatures you interact with. From different guardians of each area, to these little Ori-like creatures throughout the game, to the different people in the central town area. They help make the world feel much more alive, and feel like an actual forest. It also helps because they're nice people. I want to help them, and it gives motivation to see it through to the end. You can also help them in side quests to either return the town back to its former glory, or to do fetch quests to gain more points to further upgrade yourself. But sadly, for all the things they improved, there were definitely some missteps along the way. So Ori Will of the Wisps does have its share of issues. For one, I don't think this game quite has the same sense of flow as the original game, and that's mostly down to control. See, you have a lot of skills this time, but those skills are all on buttons that are used for multiple actions. So there will be several times you meant to do one thing, but then you do something completely different. And if that was over a pit or a do or die scenario, you're redoing that section. The prime examples is your dig move. You can dig through the ground and such and launch yourself through the air when you get out. The problem is you have these bits of ground floating through the air that you need to launch yourself into in order to do platforming, and this felt clunky. Not only because you need to line yourself up in the air in order to get a better shot, where you don't have a slow down time feature like the bash, but you need to even hope the button works and not gives you another action like the air dash. You really feel these in the time trials because god, messing up because the game didn't recognize what you wanted to do and having to restart the entire thing is tiring. This is why I ended up taking my time much more, and I didn't feel as free as I did in Ori 1. And I feel like I'm in the minority on this one, but I don't like the shard system that much. See, at the start you're only allowed to have 3 equipped at a time until you start tackling those battle gates. And I'm just kinda scratching my head at this thing. In Ori 1, the ability tree made it so every skill was equipped all at once, and it provided reason to keep grabbing points to keep upgrading yourself. But here, only a few are really worth it. And stuff like the triple jump and wall climb are so essential that I had to leave those on the entire time. And these were upgrades that were equipped automatically when you got them last time, so what's the deal now? The only other ones I really had equipped were the defense and damage upgrades. This doesn't allow for as much customization as it appears, as only a few of them are really worth it, and the others feel like such an afterthought, like giving you 1 more unit of health or letting you switch your health or energy. Yeah, this feels like it wasn't really fleshed out. This has a trickle-down effect for the rest of the game. See, you can find out our abilities in the overworld or at the shop. Now, I went for the abilities that you can find in the world, no problem, but the ones at the shop, I just didn't care to buy them because I didn't see any actual benefits in using them. And remember, you're mainly using the currency on these upgrades, and the rewards for most of the side quests is just getting currency. But since I didn't find the rewards that worth it, especially doing stuff like the town restoring became more pointless by the end of the game. I didn't have much motivation to do the side quests because I didn't find the rewards that worth it. I finished the game with only about 80% completion, and for metroidvanias, I'm a stickler for getting 100%, so that felt super odd to me, and I think this is the reason why. And while this game has a grander scope, I strangely think it doesn't leave as much of an impact. The boss fights and bigger moments I can think of were fine, but they weren't exactly memorable. And it doesn't help that the chase sequences here were really shortened by like a lot. Let's put it like this, I didn't find any moment in this game to come even close to matching the Jinzo tree from Ori 1. That is still hands down the best part of the series so far. And then there's this little area called the Molewood Depths. Oh my god. I don't remember the last time I've had an area that made me this frustrated. The entire gimmick here is that you stay out of the light for too long, you die. But the time is so short, like maybe a second at most. And the layout is so confusing, it makes no sense with this setup. I had to put the game down and go to a different area next session because it made me that frustrated. Honestly, this area makes me believe this is why the checkpoint system was changed. It was that bad. And when the lights come back up in this area, no problem with the layout at all. It's a dumb gimmick that ruins an otherwise fine area, and easily the worst part of the game. I know I'm sounding pretty negative, but I did really have a fun time here. It's just one of those things where all the best moments and changes are at the start of the game, and all the problems and issues really become more apparent by the end. So that leaves the sequel in a bit of an odd state to compare. Ori Will of the Wisps is a very ironic sequel, and what I mean by that is, it feels like it fixed all the major issues that were here from the first game, like the checkpoint system, combat, and balance, but it feels like they also removed what made the original game so enjoyable, like the flow and control not being as tight, the ability system feels like a downgrade, and it doesn't quite reach the biggest highs of the previous game. So that leaves me in a bit of a weird position when reviewing it. Do those changes make it a better or worse game? Well, honestly, I think I put the two games on equal ground. Critically speaking, I really wouldn't put one above the other. I feel like personally I'll go back more to Ori 1, but Ori 2 has great changes that make it worth playing as well. It's just more of a preference thing to me. I wouldn't really classify them as the best Metroidvanias of this generation, as there are other games I feel like I go back to more often, but if you're interested in both games, they're definitely worth checking out. And that's it for Ori right now. I don't really know if there will end up being a third game just based on the ending, but there might end up being another Ultimate Edition like they did with the first game. And if that ends up happening, I'll be back to check out the changes. My opinion of the overall game may change by then, you never know. But it's time to catch up with another Metroidvania star, so next time, we're checking out Shantae and the 7 Sirens. See you then.